There's a system out there that is so pervasive yet so incredibly hidden that most of us interact with its effects every single day without even realizing it. Welcome to this explainer, where we're going to unpack the invisible mechanism that's driving the entire global economy and, frankly, holding up the American way of life. Okay, let's dive right into what is honestly a massive global paradox. Over in Europe right now, Britain is running a budget deficit of about 4.7% of their GDP. France is sitting at 5.5%, and the result? They are facing emergency budgets, automatic austerity, and a whole lot of political turmoil. But then you look over at America. The US is running a much higher deficit, we're talking 6.5% of GDP, yet they're happily hiking spending and cutting taxes like debt is completely costless.
So that brings us to the trillion-dollar question. Why doesn't the US face the exact same debt crisis? We are looking at a fundamental anomaly in global economics. And to really understand why your groceries cost what they do, or why mortgage rates bounce around, we absolutely have to answer this question.
Which brings us to Section 1. America's Magic Economic Power.
The Stanford Review recently published this absolutely fascinating analysis. They argue that the answer to our paradox lies in an invisible, modern empire. Now, unlike the empires of the past, the ones built on military conquest and gunboats, this empire extracts its advantages entirely through its currency. We call this dollar hegemony. It's the US dollar's unique role as the world's reserve currency and the absolute bedrock of global finance.
Now just grasp the sheer scale of this dominance for a second. 59% of all global foreign currency reserves, 64% of world debt, over half of all foreign trade invoices, all of it denominated in US dollars. Keep in mind, the US only produces about a quarter of global GDP, yet the dollar facilitates more economic activity than all other currencies combined. It is literally the absolute go-to, trustworthy currency of the world.
Here's the real kicker. This hegemony gives the US a staggering advantage. Because the rest of the world constantly demands dollars just to function, the US can effectively siphon foreign capital as cheap debt. It basically allows the US government to print trillions of dollars of practically free money, and then, this is the crazy part, offshore the resulting inflation to its economic partners. Essentially, the rest of the world is absorbing a massive chunk of American inflation.
But how does this engine actually run in the real world when things go wrong? Let's jump into Section 2, the global flight to safety.
A recent, highly detailed paper from the Federal Reserve lays this mechanism out beautifully using some advanced cause and effect modeling. They map out what they call a global flight to safety shock. So here's how it plays out step by step. Step 1, global risk spikes. Say a crisis hits somewhere in the world. Step 2, investors panic and immediately flee to US safe assets, specifically US treasuries. Step 3, because of this massive sudden demand, the dollar appreciates. And step 4, the result is that global inflation and global GDP actually fall. So global panic literally acts as a massive magnet for the US dollar.
And the Fed actually has the hard empirical data to back this up. Their models show that a typical global flight to safety shock depresses both US and foreign GDP by about 0.25% at the trough. This isn't just some theoretical whiteboard exercise. We're talking about real, measurable contractions in global economic activity. But here's the thing. The pain is not shared equally. The Fed's data reveals a massive asymmetric advantage. During these shocks, US corporate borrowing spreads rise by about 10 basis points. But foreign borrowing spreads, they jump by 15. The safe haven effect essentially acts as a shield for American corporations while squeezing international ones. To track all of this sentiment, the Federal Reserve uses a very specific metric called the excess bond premium, or EBP. It's an indicator that measures risk appetite in US corporate bond markets. And what this indicator proves is that during a crisis, the world's demand for safety is intrinsically overwhelmingly biased toward the US dollar. It basically proves the dollar is the world's ultimate financial safety net.
However, this magic trick can't go on forever. That brings us to Section 3, cracks in the empire.
We are actually starting to see the steel spring of dollar hegemony stretch dangerously far. As the Stanford Review points out, the foundation of American financial supremacy is steadily eroding. Back in 1999, 71% of global financial assets were stored in dollars, but by 2022, that number had plummeted to 58%. The world is, slowly but surely, storing its wealth somewhere else.
What we're facing here is a dual threat to this hegemony. Internally, there's an immense debt binge and fiscal recklessness, coupled with this isolationist sentiment that kind of neglects global alliances. Externally, we're seeing organized, deliberate efforts to undercut the dollar's hegemony, like the BRICS nations developing rival networks, or the European Union pushing euro-denominated alternatives.
And geopolitics are severely accelerating this shift. Just look at these recent developments. The West cut Russian banks out of the SWIFT system after the invasion of Ukraine. In response, Sino-Russian trade has shifted heavily to the Chinese yuan instead of the dollar.
Plus, the BRICS nations are actively developing local currency transaction networks. The weaponization of the dollar-based financial system has terrified other nations into building alternative non-dollar networks so they don't suffer the same fate.
If this hidden engine completely breaks down, the United States will inevitably face the exact same brutal emergency austerity that we are seeing in Europe right now. Which leads us to Section 4. Can the dollar survive?
Traditionally, fixing this means swallowing some pretty tough pills. It requires enforcing disciplined fiscal policy and curbing the domestic debt binge. It means making sure U.S. capital markets remain globally attractive. And it definitely requires aggressive monetary diplomacy, forging deeper ties with allies to reinforce the dollar's utility worldwide.
But the clock is absolutely ticking. The Treasury Borrowing Advisory Committee, or TBAC, they just issued a really stark warning. They noted that foreign governments and banks are actively buying less U.S. debt. So demand is shifting to price-sensitive domestic investors, like mutual funds and pension funds, which steadily increases U.S. borrowing costs and exposes the country to way greater financial volatility.
Interestingly enough, there might actually be a modern technological fix for this. Former Speaker of the House Paul Ryan argues that stablecoins could be the answer. These are digital assets pegged to the fiat dollar and backed by reserves of U.S. treasuries. Ryan argues that stablecoins are analogous to the offshore dollar-denominated liabilities that turbocharged dollar preeminence during the Cold War. Because they require U.S. debt to back them, they artificially skyrocket the global demand for U.S. treasuries.
And no joke, it is already happening. The stablecoin ecosystem is currently the 18th largest holder of U.S. treasuries in the entire world. Let that sink in for a second. A digital currency ecosystem holds more American debt than entire sovereign nations, like Germany or the Netherlands. This booming demand from the crypto space is acting as a massive, unexpected pillar supporting dollar hegemony. So, as we watch this shifting global landscape, and as the steel spring of this debt stretches further and further, we are left with a critical thought to ponder. If the hidden engine fails, if the world no longer flocks to the dollar in times of crisis, and the U.S. can no longer export its inflation, without the magic of the dollar, is the American economy actually still exceptional?